Anna, were you able to copy the local chat for us for our records? Thank you.
I'll do that now.
Testing, testing. Can you hear me, Sandrine? Can everybody hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Great. So in a while we can start with the next presentation. Welcome everyone. My name is Handrick, and it's a great pleasure for me to be here today to introduce our next presenter, Sandrine Han. She's here to talk about cultural appropriation, cultural appreciation. Please hold your questions and comments until the end of this presentation. And without further ado, here's Sandrine Han. Please, Sandrine.
Thank you, Sultan. Okay, let me start. Good day, everyone. Thank you for coming to my session today. I'm Hsiao-Cheng Han, also known as Sandrine. I'm an assistant professor at the University of British Columbia, Department of Curriculum and Pedagogy. My field is in art education, and one of my research focuses is on visual culture studies in virtual worlds. Today, my topic is on cultural appropriation or cultural appreciation. Specifically focus on the culture in the virtual world of Second Life. Let me start. Introduction. I have been conducting visual culture research in virtual world for years and have found a unique culture exists, which I call the third culture. The third culture is an intercultural worldwide mix of cultures that exist in virtual world created by residents who speak different textual languages. In the third culture, the meaning of images are built and negotiated by the third culture residents. These residents learn primarily about each other's culture through visual imagery. Virtual world residents create and recreate their own and other cultures' visual representations to promote their virtual products or ideologies. Residents in virtual worlds such as Second Life come from various geographic location and cultural backgrounds. They may have different understanding of and experience with the same imagery. Thus, the mix and match the visual imagery created in the virtual world is often more culturally complex than the visual imagery of the real world. Due to the advancement of technology, virtual experiences are just as valid as real experience. In the real world, we examine the visual in popular culture, such as movie, advertisement, and music videos, for social justice, gender equality, and issues of cultural understanding. As my previous research showed, virtual world residents prefer to visit a culture they are not familiar with. However, many virtual world creators build exotic cultural locations and objects for profit without knowing the meaning or reason of those cultural objects. Most of my previous research participants were Westerners, and those research findings showed that third culture residents must learn to be more accepting, more understanding, and less judgmental. However, a few non-Westerners I interviewed did not agree with this statement. Therefore, this presentation presents findings from a month-long in-depth ethnographical interview I conducted in Mandarin Chinese with an Asian virtual world artist. In this research, the term virtual world refers to specifically to Second Life. Second Life is an environment in which residents are able to immerse themselves and where they can create their own community and even their own culture. Literature review. In my previous research, I found that residents in the virtual world unconsciously learn from the images they encounter. However, no matter what images residents see in virtual world and what they think those images mean, those images influence how they see and understand images in the future, both the virtual and real world. In this literature review, I discussed third culture in virtual world as well as appropriation from art, media, and cultural studies perspectives. To provide an overview of virtual world culture and the meaning of cultural appropriation. The third culture in virtual world. Culture in virtual world is diverse. Virtual world residents come from around the world to form different communities. Everything visualized is built by its users, and nothing should be taken for granted. To look is an act of choice, and vision is the major sense used in virtual worlds. Images with different meaning coexist in the virtual world, and the relationship between images and residents is not direct or transparent. Individuals' culture backgrounds influence their choice of what and how they view, and their cultural backgrounds alter a great proportion of the meaning of the images. When residents spend lengthy amount of time in virtual world, they begin to view virtual worlds as reality. But many of the images may contain cultural meaning, which residents may interpret as true cultural representation. This can perpetuate incorrect stereotype of cultures. The third culture. Culture ideas and values are maintained by visual images because images can communicate, teach, and transmit the behavior, ideas, and values of a culture. McField contends that virtual world is not only a subculture, but a mainstream hyperculture shared by all online residents. The meaning of images among viewers and site designers exists in a simultaneous circulation with the virtual world. Cultural identities emerge in everyday discourse and in social practices, as well as spiritual norm and myth that are handed down to new members. In other words, people in the same culture have similar ways of thinking and feeling and acting. Today, we are bombarded with a huge number of images that we have trouble comprehending. The line between virtual worlds and reality may become perceptually non-existent. As Baudrillard stated, images have become more real than real today. Because of the power of simulated image, seeing is no longer believing. In virtual worlds, all images are real without origin or reality. That is to say, everything is hyperreal. According to Berger, the way we see things is affected by what we know or what we believe. The whole globe connects through the internet, bringing different cultures together and creating a new culture. In the virtual world, the process of immigration and globalization leads to new third identity that represent complex and shifting hybridization of earlier culture patterns. In this way, the virtual world creates a unique third culture. Appropriation. Appropriation is an important part in art history. From Duchamp to Warhol, appropriation is covered by artists' creative license. From Death of Author and Birth of Reader to Baudrillard's Simulation and Simulacrum, appropriation is critical and meaningful. The purpose of this presentation is not to discuss appropriation in art or fan art, where general public appropriate mass media products. The presentation focuses specifically on cultural appropriation in virtual worlds and analyze virtual objects from critical culture studies perspective using phenomena in the field of virtual world as an example for discussing cultural appropriation. Below, I reviewed appropriation in 3 different domains: appropriation in art, appropriation in media, technology, and social media, and appropriation in cultural studies. These 3 domains are not the same, but are essential for understanding the standpoint of this presentation. I hope reviewing appropriation in these domains will provide a clear direction on what appropriation means, as well as why research into cultural appropriation in virtual world is crucial. Appropriation in art. I use Nielsen and Schiff's critical term for art history as the foundation of this section. In this book, Summer discusses representation, followed by Potts' sign and Camille's simulacrum, as well as Nielsen's appropriation. In representation, Summer states, according to Descartes, we are not using our eyes to see, but we are using our mind. Representation are primarily significant not only in terms of what is presented, but also in terms of how it is presented. Artwork reveals both personal and collective way of seeing within the same culture. According to Summer, the world is not simply projected from the mind. It is made, and even simplicity artifact involve the techniques of gathering and working, as well as the teaching and transmission of these techniques. For Potts, we only see the meaning of our work through cultural backgrounds. In other words, we are seeing our work as a sign. Seeing an image as a sign means an image carries cultural meaning. The culture of simulacrum comes to life in a society where exchange value have been generalized to the point at which the very memory of use value is affected, and cultural imagery become commodified. Such value allow appropriation to mean improperly taking, abducting, or stealing something for one's own use. Appropriation is not passive, objective, or disinterested, but active, subjective, and motivated. Appropriation is misrepresentation, not a denial. In contemporary art, appropriation such as the ready-made collage and montage are presented as the 3 innovations of the historical avant-gardes. Without appropriation, there would be no contemporary art. However, each act of cultural appropriation therefore constructs a simulacrum of a double negation, denying the validity of individual and original production, yet denying equally the relevance of the specific context and function of the work's own practice. It is clear that appropriation in art is different from appropriation in cultural studies. With creative license, appropriation in art is one of the ways to advance the field of art. Appropriation in media, social media, and technology. Media shape our worldview and values. Media stories provide the symbols, myth, resources through which we constitute a common culture and through the appropriation of which we insert ourselves into this culture. Media teaches us, like public pedagogy, how to be who we are, how to see the world, and what norm is dominant in society. Killer also points out that we can use semiotic analysis to study cultural phenomena formed by the media, to reveal how the codes and forms of particular genre construct certain meanings. Cultural symbols contain specific ideologies. Therefore, when appropriating cultural symbols, the meaning is changed, lost, or distorted. Scholars showed an interesting phenomenon in that when Uganda translators translate Hollywood film from English, they are not translating word by word, but are recontextualizing the movie into a culturally relevant dialogue to engage their local audience. They are appropriating the global into the local, a process that we can call the globalization of the commodity. Appropriation in technology has a very different connotation. There are two aspects of appropriation in technology. First is unanticipated use, and the second is the customization. From the scholars, appropriation of digital artifacts involves their use, which has changed, evolved, or developed beyond their original design. Appropriation can be seen as interpretation or reinterpretation in which users see new opportunities with artifacts. Similar to the mod, the previous developed program code can be used for creating new objects or behaviors. Appropriation may lie in how technology is framed and articulated, that is transformed not as a technical artifact, but as a cultural object. Jenkins celebrate appropriation in technology and media education in that appropriation is the ability to meaningfully sample and remix media content. Cultural appropriation is inevitable. According to Jenkins, from beginning creators, appropriation provides a scaffolding, allowing them to focus on some dimensions of cultural production and rely on existing material to sustain others. From game design perspective, cultural appropriation occurs when game designers decontextualize cultural history, expressions, or artifacts that belong to a culture that is not their own. In turn, recontextualization them into game structures. It is important for game designers to be aware of which culture they choose to represent, in what context, and what kind of impact it might bring to the gamers. Scholars are aware that cultural appropriation in games is not only formed by the designers, but is also conceptualized by the player. Cultural appropriation is unavoidable in the context of ethno computing in that cultural appropriation can extend the designer's ethical consideration beyond member of the originating culture to include end users. Appropriation in cultural studies. Cultural appropriation, like technology appropriation, refers to the way people adapt and make it their own. Roger categorized cultural appropriation into four categories: cultural exchange, cultural dominancy, cultural exploitation, and transculturalization. In every cultural appropriation, there are those who act and those who are acted upon. And for those whose memories and cultural identities are manipulated by aesthetic, academic, economic, or political appropriation, the consequences can be disquieting or painful. Young and Haley also point out that appropriation can be offensive and harmful. In short, when a culture represents another culture, stereotypes easily occur, especially for those belonging to minority cultures. Scholars recognize that cultural appropriation is an inevitable process. Cultural appropriation is not always but purely representing another culture, but is tangled with politics, economic, globalization, and cultural hegemony. Research method. Based on my prior work on the third culture, most of the findings indicate that due to limitation in the virtual world, we should be generous in our judgment of the virtual objects built by virtual world residents. I remember in my earlier research, there was one Korean interview participant who told me she was not comfortable with how non-Korean virtual world residents represent Korea. She proudly showed me a Korean town in Second Life that was created by Koreans. I also remember one Aboriginal participant told me it was hurtful when she saw misrepresentation of her culture in the virtual world, so she tried to build her own culture representation in Second Life. After other personal experiences, I started to wonder if I should remain open-minded and generous about cultural appropriation in virtual worlds. I carry my question to Second Life Facebook group, Formosa Club in Second Life, where most of the Second Life residents are Taiwanese and use Mandarin Chinese to communicate. I post my question in the group in Mandarin Chinese and asked if anyone would be interested in chatting with me regarding my questions. Soon after that, Freya replied and expressed her interest. I was very excited to receive Freya's reply, and as I had seen her post on the Facebook group regarding how to take a professional photograph in Second Life. She spent time finding suitable props and locations, adjusting the environmental settings, and selecting the best camera angle just to shoot one photo in Second Life. The amount of time she spent taking one photo in Second Life was no less than that of all real-life photograph. In real life, Freya is a Taiwanese who lived in Beijing for 10 years. Her career was in pharmaceutical, but she had transferred to biotechnology-related fields. She is interested in international relations regarding to politics and economics. She stated that she feels her personality in Second Life is closer to her real self. We started our non-structured interview conversation in Second Life right away and had a conversation every day for 3 to 4 hours, 5 days a week. It became a more than month-long unstructured interview. Besides discussing in Second Life, Freya also sent me several text documents on Facebook or in Second Life that related to this topic. We also discussed many Second Life snapshots showed on the Flickr. All our conversations were typed in Chinese traditional characters. Findings. I analyzed the extensive data and found that there were 3 threads in our conversation. First, cultural appropriation in virtual worlds. Second, caring about cultural appropriation. And third, solution to cultural appropriation in virtual worlds. Below, I will unpack the 3 aforementioned threads in detail. Cultural appropriation in virtual worlds. From the research I found, there are 3 reasons that cause cultural appropriation in virtual worlds. First, language barrier. Second, lack of cultural context. And third, people prefer exotic rather than original. As for the language barrier, it is mostly about unequal accessibility to information. That is to say, when a non-Asian virtual world resident create Asian product, they have fewer resources that can be translated into English or Western languages. This issue can be divided into several subcategories. People do not have enough access to the language that they are creating for. Therefore, the culture they are representing might be misunderstood. B. Personal translation or interpretation. A virtual world resident might rely upon a resident from the culture or language system. However, the translation and interpretation might contain personal biases. C. The translation or interpretation between languages. Virtual world residents might be able to translate text from a translator. However, during the translation, the cultural context might not be able to translate it or understood. The translation interpretation from languages to image. When a virtual world resident translates a description into a tangible object, the connotation might not be able to translate it into a meaningful way. Translation interpretation from image to meaning. Most of the virtual world creators do research before they create. However, when they research the image they are recreating, they are unable to understand the context or meaning of the image. Therefore, when they put multiple cultural items together, misunderstanding occurs. F. Translation interpretation from 2D images to 3D objects. When translating 2D image into 3D object, the creator are not able to make sense of how the 3D object might be used or presented in the real life. Therefore, there are more chances of misunderstanding. Lack of cultural context occur mostly because of people prefer to stay in their original cultural circle, also called the comfort zone, with their own language speakers. These cultural groups are similar to the real-world geographical boundaries. These boundaries in both virtual and real worlds build walls between knowing other cultures and being known by other cultures. Within the same culture, when virtual world residents see cultural imagery they are not familiar with, they do not ask further. They do not have the cultural context to be able to ask more or critical questions. Because they do not have the cultural context, when they can find an item to be purchased, they may not consider whether it is appreciation or appropriation. Therefore, when the buyers are not critical, the sellers or creators are given permission to create objects without knowing the cultural details. Freya noted that virtual world residents prefer exotic rather than original. She states, distance from the reality brings the curiosity. From the data, I found the distance can be distance from other culture group and or distance to cultural imagery. When there is distance from other cultural group, imagination fills the gap between the cultural object and the reality. Virtual world residents do not really seem to know all details about cultural groups to awaken their imagination, but they prefer to enjoy the unknown. The distance to cultural imagery include, but is not limited to, appropriated works, imaginary work, and creative artwork. Many virtual world creators argue that requiring cultural authenticity limits their creativity of virtual world artwork. Therefore, the statement leads us to the next thread. Why should we care? Caring about cultural appropriation. In the real world, we critically examine visual culture. In immersive virtual world, we should also use some critical eyes to look into virtual world creation because every artifact is created by a real human with various reasons of creating it. From the data I found, there are several questions we ask about a real-world visual culture that are also applicable to virtual world visual culture, especially to the culture-related creations. The questions are, who is benefit from the cultural creation? Who are the creators? For what purpose did they create the cultural objects? What messages are they delivering? And who are the audience? What messages are they receiving from the cultural objects? What they might think about the culture that is appropriated. Culture sells. In the real world, tourism sells cultures. Souvenirs are culture products. Human beings are attracted to different cultures and culture products. Virtual world culture creations are much easier to make because of fewer real-world physical limitations, and they are rarely criticized because people prefer to stay with their cultural group. Virtual world creators pay less attention to cultural appropriation. However, the influence they bring to the world is no less than real-world cultural appropriation. Solutions to cultural appropriation in virtual worlds. Freya strongly recommend that cultural exchanges and mutual respects are solutions to cultural appropriation in virtual worlds. Cultural exchange introduces our own cultures to others with whom we are interested. In an equal platform, virtual world residents celebrate their own culture and introduce their own culture to others. With language support, 3D virtual objects introduce and explain cultural context to people who are not familiar with the culture. Mutual respect asks us to care for and learn about other cultures in the cultural context. We should not stop at the tolerance, but learn to mutually respect other cultures. Each cultural symbol contains specific meaning. Misuse, misrepresentation, and appropriation should not be simply tolerated. Limitation on getting to know cultural context is recognized. However, cultural objects are not being made fun of, joked around about, or treated with contempt. Virtual world creators should be consciously aware of the power of their creation and avoid cultural appropriation. Conclusion. Culture is to be lived and to be learned. The connotation of cultural symbol is negotiated and learned within the culture. When we are in a dominant culture using another cultural object, we are unable to know the context of it and cultural appropriation happens. The finding of my previous research has shown that it is important to be open-minded in the virtual world. However, it is also important to be respectful of other cultural imagery while creating virtual objects. Cultural imagery carries cultural meanings. Virtual imagery rapidly deliver, exaggerate, and create a strong impact. Massive visual impact affects viewers who do not have time to process each image. Deviation between the original cultural artifacts created by the cultural owner and final elements that is perceived by viewers are linked through cultural-based connotations. Looking critically at virtual objects without a cultural context is not an easy task. I believe we need to develop visual literacy to help virtual world residents learn how to read, see, and decode virtual imagery. Visual literacy also help virtual world creators be aware of cultural details that they create. That's all for my presentation today. To me, the third culture research is not done yet. I have another research idea is forming. I hope to implement this in this summer. If you are interested, please IM me, let me know. Before I finish, I would also like to give a special thank you to all the Second Life creators and photographers for all the images that show in this presentation. If you have any questions, comments, or thoughts, please let me know. I'm more than happy to hear what you think about this topic. Thank you. Yes, I'm on ResearchGate. I guess if you search Sandrine Han, you will be able to find me. I'm also on the academia, so yeah. I would like to hear what you think about this presentation because of this research actually is come out from last year after I done my presentation in VWBPE about the third culture, cultural tolerance, and after the discussion I had, I started to do the this research. I'm doing the third culture research since 2008 or 9, so it has been about 10 years. I still have a lot of questions, so I would really like to hear what do you think about this topic. What do I think about the Japan tempura sim? This is Beth typed. I have often wondered about how assuming other culture avatars' appearances affects other people. Yes, this is actually one of the reasons why I started this research. I've been in Second Life for long enough, I think, and I found the starting point was I see some people they create a Chinese. I'm a Taiwanese. They created Chinese temple in Second Life, and when I was in that environment, I was feeling very uncomfortable. I feel the color is wrong. The way of putting the gods is wrong. And to me, it's I can just simply haha and then let it go. But the more of this kind of places I've been to, and the more I start to think why people are trying to create another culture, because I believe they appreciate that culture, they like it. But I also think maybe if it make me uncomfortable, maybe it also make other people uncomfortable too. And in my other research, I really see some Asians or people they are not frequently using English for communication. They told me there are so many this kind of issue in Second Life, but they are not able to. But in my previous research, their numbers are not big enough to make an impact. So in the next research I am thinking to conduct is to use multi-language, and then I can have more input from other language users, and then I can hear more voices from other people. Wait, I'm reading from Sheila's words. Oh yeah, okay. So yeah, on ResearchGate, I'm Hsiao-Cheng Han. I think we all appreciate other cultures. I'm a Taiwanese. I married with a Turkish guy that I found in Second Life, and we now live in Canada. I appreciate that other cultures, but when I am Turks, but when I am seeing the things in Second Life, I really see the cultural groups, and that's really interests me. That's how and why people creating or recreating, presenting or representing another culture. Why they are doing it, and because to me this have impact to our real life. It shows the meaning of how we see the things. It might really create a stereotypical impact to us in a not a very good way. That's why I think it is important to note the cultural appropriation in the virtual world. I really like people appreciate other cultures like myself, but I also think, yeah, this is important to be noted. Okay. Non-Japanese player tends to choose. Yeah. You know, when I first came to Canada, I'm in Vancouver. the very first time, I was really like, wow, it feels like I'm in Second Life right now. I walk on the street, I see all the signs from English, Chinese, Punjabi, whatever kind of things that you can see in Second Life that you can see in Vancouver. It was a very interesting moment to me. So I also thinking about to connect the virtual and the real one day soon. So I can, I hope people can see the importance of virtual builds that they created is as important as the real world objects they are creating. We can be so creative, but we can also, all these creations can have a strong impact. Yeah, there are just many aspects that I think is important to do the research, but yeah. Yeah, I can. Yeah, I would love to do that. Edit. Beth also asked a question that my avatar looked like a European face. Yes, I need to say, yeah, this is true. I tried to find an Asian face. It is so hard to find an Asian looking avatar. If I don't go to the Japanese shops, and this couple years I don't really have time to do my shopping. So maybe next time I should be an animal. That will be easier to discuss this kind of topic. That's right. It is so hard to find on Euroskins in Second Life. I was trying very hard to find a more Asian looking head, but I was not able to modify it because they are preset. So yeah, I would love to have an Asian face. I think previous years I was more Asian in Second Life. Yeah. Yeah, it's just very interesting to talk about this topic and with this face. Yeah, that's right. My Japanese is not so good, so when I doing my searches, I cannot really find a good find. But many of my Taiwanese friends, they can find really good Asian face, and yeah, I just didn't ask them where they bought it. Yeah, Earth, that's so true. The aged face is not easy to find, and but I seen some very good, pretty aged avatar in Second Life. Then they are very well built. That's right. Yeah, that's my question. Sultan, can we modify the bento face? I didn't do a lot of research into the. Yes? Interesting experience for me. Place for Japanese countries. And Japanese culture concept could enjoy the environment. Yeah, sure. Earth, if you want to talk more about the cultural appropriation, appreciation, yes, of course. I would love to talk more about this.
I need to cook.
I think what I want to say is appropriation and appreciation is I cannot say they are the two sides of the coins, but appropriation is an important learning process. But just we need to be aware of what we are doing. It's not just we are thinking, okay, whatever, let's just make something without knowing that, and then we are making money of the things that we are making, because everyone got the ideology that behind the things that we are creating, and that is, to me, that is very important, and it is very dangerous. I agree that cultural diffusion happens all the time and always has throughout the history. Culture changes, and there is no right or wrong to do. But I need to clarify that I'm in the context that I'm in Canada, and then Aboriginal. And how gentle and very careful when we are doing it. So that's why I think it's also pushed me more towards to this research direction. It's not just something we can make fun of. We cannot just make a totem pole without thinking much. We cannot just making whatever kind of First Nation object without the permission from the First Nation group. So yeah, I think that's where I'm coming from, and I'm still looking forward to see where it can lead me to. I don't have the answer to the cultural appropriation or appreciation, but just would like to share with you. This is what I found now, and yeah, maybe we can have more discussions next year. Thank you.